All right, let's go. Number 10. The Tully Monster and the Creature That Broke Classification. In 1958, an amateur fossil hunter named Francis Tully was searching through the Mason Creek fossil beds of Illinois when he split open a concretion and found something that should not exist. The creature inside was roughly 14 inches long, shaped like a torpedo, with a long, flexible proboscis ending in a claw lined with sharp teeth. Its eyes protruded from the sides of its body on a rigid bar, like a hammerhead shark, stretched into nightmare geometry. Tully brought the specimen to the Field Museum of Natural History in Chicago, expecting scientists to identify it within days. They could not. More than 6 decades later, they still cannot. The Tully monster, formerly named Tully monstrum gregarium, lived approximately 300 million years ago during the Carboniferous period, when Illinois was a warm, shallow sea at the edge of a tropical coastline. Thousands of specimens have been recovered from the Mason Creek Formation, making it one of the most abundant fossils in the region. It became the Illinois state fossil in 1989. School children learn its name. Tourists buy replicas in museum gift shops. Scientists build entire careers around studying it. Universities hold conferences devoted to it. And yet, no researcher on Earth can definitively tell you what kind of animal it was. The problem is that the Tully monster fits into no known branch of the tree of life. Its body plan resembles nothing else in the fossil record, living or extinct. In 2016, a team of researchers at Yale published a paper in the journal Nature, claiming they had finally solved the mystery. They argued the creature was a vertebrate, specifically a primitive relative of the lamprey, based on what they interpreted as a notochord running along its body. The scientific community briefly celebrated. The Tully monster had a home. Textbooks were updated. Museum placards were rewritten. The mystery appeared to be over at last. Then, in 2017, another team of researchers published a direct rebuttal. They argued the structure identified as a notochord was actually a gut trace, and that the chemistry of the fossils showed no evidence of vertebrate tissue. The Tully monster was not a vertebrate after all. In 2023, yet another team using advanced imaging techniques concluded the creature could not be a vertebrate because its eye structure was fundamentally incompatible with vertebrate anatomy. Every few years, a new paper claims to have solved the mystery. Every few years, another paper tears that solution apart. The creature refuses to stay classified. It slips through every category we build for it. What makes the Tully monster particularly unsettling is what its existence implies. The Carboniferous seas of 300 million years ago were not a backwater of evolution. They were well documented, heavily studied, and filled with creatures whose relatives we can trace into the modern world. Horseshoe crabs lived then and live now. Sharks swam those waters and swim today. The ancestors of modern insects crawled along the shorelines. Yet here, swimming among the recognizable ancestors of fish and arthropods was something that left no descendants, no relatives, and no clear evolutionary lineage. It existed in enormous numbers. It thrived in its ecosystem, and then it vanished without leaving a single evolutionary trace behind. It was erased from biology itself. The truly disturbing aspect is the possibility the Tully monster represents. If an animal this abundant, this well-preserved, and this intensely studied can defy every attempt at classification, how many other branches of life once existed that we have missed entirely? The tree of life we teach in textbooks is not a complete map. It is a partial reconstruction built from fragments. The Tully monster is a reminder that evolution once produced entire body plans we cannot even categorize, and then erased them so completely that only a single fossil bed in Illinois remembers they ever existed. Somewhere in deep time, entire kingdoms of life may have risen and fallen without leaving even that much behind. The Tully monster is not a single mystery. It is a warning that the fossil record we rely on is riddled with silences we cannot hear. Number 9. the Hallucigenia and the creature assembled upside down. In 1977, paleontologist Simon Conway Morris was cataloging fossils from the Burgess Shale, a 508 million year old fossil bed in the Canadian Rockies that preserves some of the oldest complex animals on Earth. He encountered a creature so bizarre that he named it Hallucigenia, a reference to its dreamlike and unreal appearance. The original reconstruction showed a worm-like body walking on 7 pairs of rigid spikes, with a row of tentacles waving from its back and a blob at one end that Conway Morris interpreted as the head. It looked like something a child might draw if asked to invent an alien. For nearly 15 years, this was the accepted scientific image of Hallucigenia, printed in textbooks and museum displays around the world. Students memorized it. Researchers built theories around it. Then, in 1991, new specimens from China revealed that Conway Morris had assembled the creature entirely wrong. The spikes were not legs. They were defensive spines on its back. The tentacles were not decorations. They were its legs. Scientists had been looking at Hallucigenia upside down for over a decade. The reconstruction was flipped, and the creature suddenly made more sense. Walking on soft, flexible legs with a row of rigid spines protecting its back from predators. Every textbook had to be revised. Every museum display had to be rebuilt. 15 years of scientific literature had to be reinterpreted. But the mystery was not over. In 2015, researchers at the University of Cambridge used advanced electron microscopy to examine specimens more closely and discovered another error. The blob that scientists had identified as the head for nearly 40 years was not a head at all. It was a stain of decomposed gut contents leaking from the actual head, which was located at the opposite end of the body. Hallucigenia had been reconstructed with its front and back reversed. For decades, scientists had been studying its tail and calling it a face. The creature had been walking backwards through every scientific paper ever written about it. The error had traveled from researcher to researcher for nearly half a century. The real head, when finally identified, revealed something even stranger. Hallucigenia had a ring of small teeth inside its throat, spaced along a circular mouth, with another set of needle-like teeth extending further down its esophagus. Its eyes were tiny and simple, barely more than pigment spots. The creature that lived 508 million years ago in the Cambrian seas looked nothing like anything alive today. Its closest living relatives are velvet worms, small obscure creatures that live in tropical forests and squirt adhesive slime at their prey. But Hallucigenia is so different from velvet worms that the connection is only detectable through microscopic anatomical details that took decades to identify. The family resemblance is so faint that it borders on invisible. What makes Hallucigenia particularly disturbing is the lesson it teaches about the limits of scientific reconstruction. For 40 years, the world's leading paleontologists studied this fossil, published papers about it, and confidently explained its anatomy in textbooks. They were wrong about which end was the head. They were wrong about which side was up. They were wrong about what its spines were for. Every major feature of the creature was misidentified, and the errors survived decades of peer review and professional scrutiny because no one thought to question the original interpretation. The experts were confidently, publicly, repeatedly wrong, and no one noticed. The truly unsettling implication is simple. Hallucigenia is one of thousands of fossils from the Cambrian explosion. That narrow window, 540 million years ago, when nearly every major animal body plan on Earth appeared almost simultaneously. If scientists could be this wrong about one of the most famous and studied Cambrian fossils for 40 years, how wrong might they still be about the others? How many creatures in the fossil record are being reconstructed backwards, upside down, or assembled from the wrong pieces right now? The Cambrian seas were filled with animals whose body plans have no modern analogs. Creatures with 5 eyes, creatures that swam with fins on their heads, creatures that looked like tulips anchored to the seafloor. We are looking at the origin of animal life itself through a broken lens, and we do not know how many of our pictures are still inverted. The truth of the Cambrian may be stranger than anything we have reconstructed so far. Number 8. The Carolina butchering ground and the mammoths that died in formation. In the swamps of South Carolina, buried beneath layers of peat and sediment, lies a site that challenges everything we thought we knew about North America's prehistoric extinctions. The Topper site, located along the Savannah River, contains evidence of human activity dating back at least 16,000 years, and possibly as far as 50,000 years, depending on which researchers you ask. But the strangest discoveries have come from a nearby bone bed, where the remains of mammoths, mastodons, and ancient bison lie piled in ways that defy natural explanation. The bones are not scattered randomly, as they would be if the animals died naturally and were buried by floods or sediment over time. They are clustered in tight groupings, with multiple individuals of the same species concentrated in specific locations. Many of the bones show cut marks consistent with butchering, made by stone tools designed to strip meat from bone efficiently. Some of the skulls have puncture wounds consistent with deliberate killing blows. The animals did not die of old age or disease. They were killed, processed, and their remains were left in organized patterns that suggest systematic hunting on a scale we struggle to explain. The ground itself is a crime scene frozen in time. What makes this particularly disturbing is the age of the oldest evidence. Mainstream archaeology places the first human arrival in North America at around 15,000 years ago, based on the Clovis culture whose distinctive spear points appear across the continent at that time. But the Topper site contains stone tools and butchered bones that some researchers date to periods well before Clovis, suggesting that humans were hunting megafauna in the Americas thousands of years earlier than the textbooks allow. If the oldest dates are correct, human beings were killing mammoths in South Carolina before the last glacial maximum even began. The implications rewrite the entire human history of the continent. They rewrite the timeline of human expansion across the planet itself. The bone bed contains evidence of coordinated group hunting. The animals appear to have been driven into specific locations, possibly swampy areas where they became trapped in the mud and then killed systematically. The butchering patterns suggest the hunters knew exactly how to dismember a mammoth efficiently, removing high-value cuts of meat and leaving behind the parts they did not need. This is not the work of opportunistic scavengers or lone hunters. It is industrial-scale killing performed by groups with specialized knowledge, stone tool technology, and coordinated strategies. The hunters had done this before, many times, in many places, over many generations. The skill was ancestral, passed down through bloodlines we cannot trace. The truly unsettling aspect is what these sites imply about the great extinction event that ended the Pleistocene. Around 13,000 years ago, North America lost more than 30 genera of large mammals, including mammoths, mastodons, giant ground sloths, saber-toothed cats, and dire wolves. The cause has been debated for decades. Some scientists blame climate change as the last ice age ended. Others blame human overhunting. A controversial theory suggests a comet impact triggered catastrophic environmental collapse. The Topper site and similar locations suggest that humans were already killing megafauna on a massive scale for thousands of years before the extinction peak, potentially pushing species toward collapse long before climate change or any other factor delivered the final blow. The giants were dying while the ice still ruled the continent. The most haunting detail is the precision of the butchering marks. These were not desperate kills by starving hunters. The animals were processed methodically, their meat harvested with practiced efficiency, their bones discarded in organized piles. Whoever killed these creatures knew exactly what they were doing. They had done it many times before, and they left behind a graveyard in the South Carolina swamps that still preserves, after more than 13,000 years, the evidence of a systematic slaughter that may have helped erase an entire age of giants from the face of North America. We do not know how many such sites still lie buried beneath the modern landscape. They're stories of ancient hunting waiting to rewrite the timeline of human impact on the natural world. Every swamp, every riverbank, every buried lakebed could be hiding another graveyard we have not yet found. The extinction of the megafauna may not be a mystery at all. It may be a crime we are only now beginning to investigate. Number 7. The Devonian forests that poisoned the oceans. Such. Approximately 380 million years ago, during the Devonian period, Earth experienced something unprecedented in the history of life. The first true forests emerged. Trees with deep root systems, woody trunks, and complex vascular tissue spread across the continents for the first time, transforming landscapes that had been dominated by low-lying plants and primitive mosses. It should have been a triumph of life, a green revolution that set the stage for every forest ecosystem that would follow. Instead, it triggered one of the largest mass extinctions in Earth's history, and scientists are still trying to understand exactly how it happened. The Late Devonian extinction event, which unfolded in multiple pulses over approximately 25 million years, killed roughly 75% of all species on Earth. The oceans were hit hardest. Coral reefs that had flourished for tens of millions of years collapsed and would not fully recover for another 100 million years. Entire groups of marine animals vanished, including the vast majority of armored fish, trilobite species, and reef-building organisms. The seas became anoxic, meaning they lost their oxygen, leaving behind black shales rich in organic matter, but devoid of life. And the timing matches almost exactly with the spread of the first forests. The correlation is too precise to ignore. The connection seems counterintuitive at first. How could trees growing on land kill fish in the ocean? The answer lies in the chemistry of soil. Before deep-rooted trees existed, soils were thin and nutrient-poor. The arrival of trees with extensive root systems broke apart bedrock, extracted minerals, and created the first deep soils in Earth's history. When rain fell on these new soils, it washed enormous quantities of dissolved nutrients, particularly phosphorus, into rivers and ultimately into the oceans. The seas were suddenly flooded with fertilizer on a scale the planet had never experienced. The trees were feeding the water with poison without knowing it. The forests were weapons no creature had designed. What followed was an algal bloom of planetary proportions. Massive populations of phytoplankton exploded across the oceans, consuming the excess nutrients. When these organisms died, they sank to the seafloor, where bacteria decomposed them and consumed all the available oxygen in the process. The result was ocean-wide anoxia, vast dead zones where no animal could survive. Fish, corals, trilobites, and countless other marine species suffocated in water that had suddenly become toxic to breathe. The forests that brought life to the land simultaneously strangled life in the sea. Two ecosystems, bound by the same water cycle, locked in a slow, fatal embrace. The green world above and the dying world below, connected by rivers of death. What makes this particularly horrifying is the timescale. The extinction did not happen overnight. It unfolded over millions of years in slow pulses of death. As forests expanded, soils thickened, nutrient runoff intensified, and ocean oxygen levels crashed again and again. Each pulse killed species that had survived the previous one. The recovery between pulses was incomplete. The ecosystem never stabilized. For 25 million years, Marine life was suffocating in slow motion while forests grew across the continents above, and nothing could stop the process because the cause was rooted in the very growth of life itself. Evolution had built a trap that evolution could not escape. Every new tree deepened the wound. The truly disturbing implication reaches into our present. Human agriculture and fertilizer use are currently dumping phosphorus and nitrogen into the oceans at rates that rival or exceed the Devonian nutrient flood. Dead zones are expanding in the Gulf of Mexico, the Baltic Sea, and coastal waters around the world. The mechanism that nearly ended complex marine life 380 million years ago is happening again, compressed into decades rather than millions of years. The Devonian forests show what happens when one part of the biosphere overwhelms another. They show that life itself can be the agent of mass extinction, not through malice or asteroid impacts, but through the simple logic of chemistry and consequence. And they show that the fossil record contains warnings we have not yet learned to read. The past is not finished speaking. Number 6, the ancient footprints that should not exist. In 2021, a team of researchers working at White Sands National Park in New Mexico announced a discovery that sent shockwaves through the archaeological community. They had found fossilized human footprints preserved in ancient lakebed sediments, and radiocarbon dating of seeds embedded in the same layers placed the prints between 21,000 and 23,000 years old. If the dates were correct, humans were walking through New Mexico during the peak of the last ice age, at least 6,000 years earlier than the mainstream timeline for human arrival in the Americas allowed. The discovery was either an error or a revolution. There was no middle ground. The scientific community reacted with skepticism. Critics pointed out that the seeds used for dating belonged to an aquatic plant that could have absorbed old carbon from the lake water, making the samples appear older than they actually were. For 2 years, the debate raged in scientific journals. Then, in 2023, a follow-up study used multiple independent dating methods, including optically stimulated luminescence and radiocarbon dating of terrestrial plant material, to confirm the original findings. The footprints were real. The dates were real. Humans were in North America during the last glacial maximum, a time when most of the continent was supposed to be uninhabited wilderness, locked beneath massive ice sheets. The textbooks were wrong. What makes the White Sands footprints particularly unsettling is what they reveal about the people who made them. The prints belong primarily to children and adolescents, with occasional adult tracks mixed in. They show movement across soft lakebed mud in patterns that suggest daily activity, not migration or hunting. The children walked in groups, sometimes carrying loads, sometimes running, sometimes pausing. These were not travelers passing through. They were residents, families, communities that had lived in the area long enough for children to use the lakebed as part of their normal routine. They were home. Their lives were woven into the land. The implications shatter decades of archaeological consensus. If humans were living in New Mexico 23,000 years ago, they must have arrived even earlier, because populations do not appear spontaneously. They had to travel from somewhere. The traditional Bering land bridge theory places human entry into the Americas at approximately 15,000 years ago, when ice-free corridors opened up between the massive glaciers covering Canada. But 23,000 years ago, those corridors were sealed shut. The only possible routes were along the Pacific coast by boat, or through some other pathway we have not yet identified. Both options require technology and knowledge we did not believe existed at that time. The first Americans had to be more capable than we ever allowed them to be. What makes the footprints particularly disturbing is what they represent. For more than a century, American archaeology operated under the assumption that humans entered the continent relatively recently, around 13,000 to 15,000 years ago, as part of a single migration that spread rapidly across the landscape. The white sands prints prove that model is wrong. Humans were here thousands of years earlier, which means the entire archaeological timeline of the Americas needs to be rewritten. Every assumption about when people arrived, how they spread, what they hunted, and how they lived must now be questioned. An entire discipline is standing on ground it no longer understands. The foundation has cracked. The truly haunting aspect is what we have lost. If humans lived in North America for 8,000 years longer than we believed, then 8,000 years of human history are missing from the record. Entire civilizations, the cultures, languages, and ways of life existed on this continent during the Ice Age, and we have almost no evidence of them. The White Sands footprints are one of the only physical traces we have of a population that must have numbered in the thousands or tens of thousands across the continent. Everything else, every tool, every shelter, every story, every name has been erased by time, ice, and the simple indifference of geological processes. We are looking at the literal footprints of a lost world, pressed into lake bed mud during the coldest period of the last ice age, and we do not know who they were, where they came from, or what happened to them. The children who ran across that mud are a ghost population, visible only in the shape of their feet. They left no other message behind. Number 5. The Permian extinction and the Great Dying that almost ended everything. Approximately 252 million years ago, at the boundary between the Permian and Triassic periods, Earth experienced the closest thing to total annihilation that life has ever survived. Scientists call it the Permian-Triassic extinction event, but its nickname captures the scale more accurately: the Great Dying. Roughly 96% of all marine species vanished. Approximately 70% of terrestrial vertebrate species disappeared. Even insects, which had never suffered a mass extinction before and have never suffered one since, lost the majority of their diversity. Life on Earth came within a razor-thin margin of ending completely, and we are still trying to understand exactly what happened. The killing mechanism was unlike anything in the fossil record before or since. It was not a single catastrophe, but a cascading series of environmental disasters that compounded each other over hundreds of thousands of years. The trigger appears to have been the Siberian Traps, one of the largest volcanic eruptions in Earth's history, which spewed molten rock across an area larger than modern-day Europe. These eruptions continued for nearly 2 million years, releasing carbon dioxide, methane, and sulfur dioxide into the atmosphere at rates that dwarfed anything modern industrial civilization has achieved. The planet's climate system collapsed under the strain. What followed was a sequence of horrors that compounded on one another. Global temperatures rose by as much as 10 degrees Celsius, or turning tropical seas into water warm enough to kill most marine life directly. Ocean acidification dissolved the shells of creatures that had ruled the seas for 200 million years. Oxygen levels in the water plummeted, creating anoxic dead zones across entire ocean basins. On land, the combination of heat, drought, and atmospheric poisoning killed forests and turned continents into wastelands. The geological record of the period contains something called the coal gap, a span of 10 million years during which almost no coal deposits formed anywhere on Earth because there were so few forests left to create them. What makes the Permian extinction particularly terrifying is what the rock record reveals about the final stages. Geologists studying end Permian sediments have found evidence of hydrogen sulfide poisoning on a global scale. As the oceans lost their oxygen, sulfate-reducing bacteria thrived in the dead waters, producing enormous quantities of hydrogen sulfide gas. This gas bubbled up from the seas and drifted across the continents, poisoning anything that breathed it. The sky itself became toxic. Animals that had survived the heat, the drought, and the acidification died gasping in air that had become unbreathable. The boundary between sea and land dissolved as both became equally hostile to life. The truly disturbing aspect is how narrowly life survived. Modeling studies suggest that if the Siberian traps had erupted for even a few 100,000 years longer, or if the cascade had triggered slightly different feedback loops, Earth might have lost the remaining 4% of species as well. Life on our planet came within inches of total extinction. Where every animal, every plant, every fungus, every complex organism alive today descends from the handful of lineages that somehow clung to existence through that nightmare. The family tree of modern life passes through a bottleneck so narrow that it seems almost impossible anything made it through at all. The most haunting implication is the time required for recovery. After the Permian extinction ended, Earth took approximately 10 million years to develop ecosystems of comparable complexity to what had existed before. For 10 million years, the planet was a wasteland populated by a handful of surviving species that slowly radiated into new forms. The fossil record of the early Triassic is dominated by disaster taxa, opportunistic species that thrived in the absence of competitors, followed by a slow, painful rebuilding of biodiversity from almost nothing. The Great Dying proves that life is not invincible. It can be pushed to the edge of total oblivion by processes we are only beginning to understand, and the recovery can take longer than the entire history of human civilization repeated 1,000 times over. Number 4. The Nazca lines and the geoglyphs carved by people who could not see them. In the coastal desert of southern Peru, etched into the reddish-brown surface of a vast arid plateau, lie some of the most inexplicable creations in human prehistory. The Nazca lines are enormous geoglyphs, figures and geometric shapes drawn into the desert floor by removing the dark surface stones to expose the lighter soil beneath. There are over 800 straight lines, 300 geometric figures, and more than 70 animal and plant designs, some of them stretching for hundreds of meters across the ground. They were created by the Nazca culture between approximately 500 BCE and 500 CE, making some of them more than 2,500 years old. What makes the Nazca lines particularly unsettling is the fundamental paradox of their existence. The figures are so large that they can only be fully appreciated from the air, hundreds of meters above the ground. From ground level, they are essentially invisible. A person standing in the middle of the giant hummingbird geoglyph, which is over 90 meters long, would see only a series of lines in the dirt, with no sense of the overall shape. Yet the Nazca people had no aircraft, no hot air balloons that we know of, and no way to view their creations from above. They spent generations creating massive artworks that they themselves could never truly see. The precision of the lines is equally disturbing. Many of them are nearly perfectly straight across distances of several kilometers, despite the uneven terrain. The geometric shapes are mathematically precise, with angles and proportions that suggest careful planning and measurement. The animal figures, including a monkey, a spider, a condor, and a hummingbird, are rendered with artistic sophistication that rivals anything produced by more technologically advanced cultures. The Nazca created these masterpieces with nothing but stone tools, wooden stakes, and rope. And somehow, despite the scale, they made almost no mistakes. The purpose of the lines remains a complete mystery. Theories have multiplied for decades without producing consensus. Some researchers argue they were astronomical markers, aligned with the rising and setting of stars and the solstice sun. Others suggest they were ceremonial pathways, walked by priests during religious rituals intended to call rain to the desert. Still others propose they were offerings to mountain gods, deities believed to control water and fertility, created as visible prayers meant to be seen from the heights where the gods dwelled. None of these theories fully explains the scale, the variety, or the sheer obsessive effort required to create them. What makes the Nazca lines particularly disturbing is the labor they represent. Creating a single large geoglyph would have required hundreds of workers laboring for weeks or months. Creating thousands of them over the course of 1,000 years, that represents a civilizational commitment to a project that had no practical use. These were not monuments to kings, tombs for the dead, or fortifications against enemies. They were images drawn into the earth on a scale their creators could not perceive, for reasons that remain locked in a dead language and a vanished worldview. The Nazca people were pouring enormous resources into something whose value we cannot measure because we do not understand what it was for. The most haunting aspect is what the lines suggest about the Nazca themselves. They lived in one of the driest environments on Earth, where survival required constant attention to water, food, and shelter. Yet, they devoted generations of labor to creating art for an audience they could not identify. Whether their intended audience was gods, ancestors, stars, Mators, or something else entirely, the Nazca believed that audience existed, and they believed it was watching. They created the lines because they were certain someone or something was looking down. And then, around 500 CE, the Nazca culture collapsed, possibly due to prolonged drought caused by El Niño climate shifts. The lines remained, perfectly preserved in the desert air, waiting for modern aircraft to finally reveal them to eyes that could see. The audience the Nazca imagined never arrived. We arrived instead, and we still do not know what they were trying to show us. Number 3. The Toba catastrophe and the near extinction of humanity. Approximately 74,000 years ago, a volcano on the island of Sumatra in modern Indonesia erupted with a force that dwarfs anything in recorded human history. The Toba supervolcano released an estimated 2,800 cubic kilometers of magma, making it the largest volcanic eruption of the past 25 million years. The explosion was roughly 5,000 times more powerful than the 1980 eruption of Mount St. Helens. Ash from Toba has been found in sediment cores as far away as Africa, covering the entire Indian subcontinent in layers several meters thick. The sky across the northern hemisphere was darkened for years, possibly decades. What followed was a global catastrophe that nearly ended the human story. The eruption injected massive quantities of sulfur dioxide into the stratosphere, creating a planetary cooling event known as a volcanic winter. Temperatures across much of the world dropped by as much as 10 degrees Celsius. Rainfall patterns collapsed. Forests died. Herbivores starved. And the predators that depended on them starved shortly after. Across Africa, Asia, and Europe, ecosystems that had supported human populations for tens of thousands of years suddenly became hostile to life. The darkness lasted long enough to kill the harvests of any species that depended on consistent sunlight and predictable seasons. Genetic evidence tells us what happened to our ancestors during this period. Studies of human DNA reveal a severe population bottleneck around the time of the Toba eruption, during which the global population of Homo sapiens may have dropped to as few as 3,000 to 10,000 breeding individuals. The entire human species, stretched across multiple continents, was reduced to a population smaller than a modern small town. Every human being alive today descends from this tiny surviving group. Our genetic diversity is so limited compared to other great apes precisely because we all come from the same handful of ancestors who somehow made it through the volcanic winter alive. What makes the Toba catastrophe particularly terrifying is how close humanity came to extinction without ever knowing it happened. For most of the 20th century, archaeologists and geneticists had no idea that our species had passed through such a narrow bottleneck. The evidence only emerged through detailed analysis of mitochondrial DNA in the 1990s, combined with sediment core studies that identified the global ash layer from the eruption. The entire story was reconstructed from fragments of genetic code and thin bands of volcanic debris scattered across half the planet. Without modern science, we would have no memory of the disaster that nearly erased us. The implications extend into every aspect of modern human existence. Because we all descend from such a small surviving population, humanity is genetically uniform to a degree that surprises biologists. A single troop of chimpanzees in West Africa contains more genetic diversity than the entire human species spread across 7 continents. Our shared origin in the post-Toba bottleneck means that every racial group, every ethnic population, every isolated community on Earth is essentially one extended family, separated by only a few thousand generations from common ancestors who huddled in the same shrinking refugees during the volcanic winter. The most disturbing aspect is the realization that it could happen again. Toba is still active. So are other supervolcanoes, including the Yellowstone caldera in the United States, the Phlegraean fields in Italy, and the Taupo volcanic zone in New Zealand. Any of these could erupt on a similar scale, triggering another volcanic winter that would test modern civilization in ways no previous disaster has. The last time a supervolcano erupted, it reduced humanity to a handful of survivors clinging to existence in pockets of marginal habitat. The volcano did not care that we had built fire, or developed language, or spread across continents. It simply erupted, and we nearly died. The same forces that almost killed our ancestors are still buried beneath the crust of the planet, waiting. Number 2. The Younger Dryas impact and the 1,000-year winter that reshaped the world. Approximately 12,900 years ago, at the end of the last ice age, something catastrophic happened to the northern hemisphere. Temperatures that had been warming steadily for thousands of years suddenly plunged back toward glacial levels in a matter of decades. The climate event, known as the Younger Dryas, lasted approximately 1,200 years and brought Ice Age conditions back to regions that had been on the verge of temperate stability. Glaciers advanced again. Forests retreated. The megafauna of North America, already under pressure from human hunters and climate shifts, suffered a final wave of extinctions that erased mammoths, mastodons, and dozens of other species from the continent. And scientists are still arguing about what caused it. The traditional explanation involves the collapse of ice dams holding back the enormous meltwater Lake Agassiz, which covered much of central Canada at the end of the Pleistocene. According to this theory, the sudden release of cold fresh water into the North Atlantic disrupted ocean circulation patterns, shutting down the Gulf Stream and plunging the Northern Hemisphere back into glacial conditions. It is a coherent explanation that fits much of the available evidence. But in 2007, a team of researchers published a controversial alternative that has divided the scientific community ever since. The alternative hypothesis proposes that a comet or asteroid fragmented in the atmosphere above North America approximately 12,900 years ago, triggering widespread wildfires, ejecting debris into the stratosphere, and cooling the planet through dust and smoke. The evidence for this impact includes layers of nanodiamonds, microspherules, Tau, and elevated platinum levels found at sites across multiple continents, all dating to the same narrow window of time. Some researchers have also pointed to a possible impact crater buried beneath the Hiawatha Glacier in Greenland, discovered in 2018, which appears to be roughly the right size and age to match the hypothesis. What makes the Younger Dryas particularly unsettling is what happened to human populations during the event. The Clovis culture, which had spread across North America in the centuries before the Younger Dryas, collapsed almost completely. Their distinctive spear points disappeared from the archaeological record. The population crashed. Entire regions that had supported human communities became uninhabited for generations. The same cooling event that killed the mammoths also devastated the people who hunted them. Whatever caused the Younger Dryas, it reshaped the demographic landscape of the Americas in ways that still influence the genetic patterns of modern indigenous populations. What makes the impact hypothesis particularly disturbing is what it would imply if confirmed. If a fragmenting comet or asteroid really did trigger the Younger Dryas, it means that modern civilization has existed in an unusually stable climate precisely because we have not yet been hit by a similar object. The asteroid belt still contains countless fragments. Comets still pass through the inner solar system regularly. The event that reset the northern hemisphere 12,900 years ago is not a one-time occurrence locked in the past. It is a recurring possibility that could happen again, on timescales we cannot predict with current technology. The most haunting aspect is the knowledge that the Younger Dryas occurred right at the threshold of human civilization. The event ended approximately 11,700 years ago, and within a few thousand years of its conclusion, humans in the Middle East had developed agriculture, built the first permanent settlements, and begun the long process that would lead to cities, writing, and everything we call history. If the Younger Dryas had lasted a few thousand years longer, or if it had been more severe, human civilization as we know it might never have emerged. We live in the thin sliver of stable climate that followed the last great disruption, and we have no guarantee that the next disruption is not already approaching. The fossil record and the ice cores both tell the same story. Stability is the exception. Catastrophe is the rule. Number 1. Near the Chicxulub impact and the day the world ended. Approximately 66 million years ago, on an otherwise ordinary day in the Cretaceous period, a chunk of rock approximately 10 kilometers wide slammed into the shallow seas of what is now the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico. The impact released energy equivalent to roughly 100 trillion tons of TNT, creating a crater more than 180 kilometers in diameter and vaporizing everything within 1,000 kilometers of ground zero. The asteroid, now known as the Chicxulub impactor, ended the reign of the dinosaurs and triggered the extinction of approximately 75% of all species on Earth. But the details of exactly what happened in the hours, days, and years after impact are more horrifying than any horror story human imagination has ever produced. The first thing that happened was the blast wave. Within seconds of impact, a column of vaporized rock and asteroid material erupted through the atmosphere, reaching heights of thousands of kilometers. Molten debris was ejected at speeds so high that some of it escaped Earth's gravity entirely. The rest came raining back down across the globe, heating the atmosphere through friction until the sky itself began to glow red. Paleontologists studying impact layer sediments have found evidence that the entire atmosphere reached temperatures hot enough to ignite dry vegetation across the planet simultaneously. For hours after the impact, the sky above every continent was literally on fire. Wildfires consumed forests across multiple continents within a single day. Any animal that could not find shelter underground or underwater was cooked alive by the radiant heat pouring from the sky. The fossilized remains from sites around the world show evidence of mass death events consistent with thermal radiation exposure. Dinosaurs that had survived for 160 million years died within hours of the impact, scattered across landscapes that had instantly become ovens. The largest terrestrial animals that had ever existed were reduced to charred bone fragments and ash before the day was over. What followed was worse. The impact had ejected enormous quantities of pulverized rock and sulfur compounds into the stratosphere, creating a global dust veil that blocked sunlight for months or years. The surviving organisms, already devastated by the initial heat, now faced a frozen darkness in which photosynthesis became impossible. Plants died. Herbivores starved. Predators that depended on herbivores starved shortly after. As the global food chain collapsed from the bottom up as darkness settled over a planet that had been burning only weeks before. Temperatures dropped by more than 25 degrees Celsius in some regions. Ice formed in places that had been tropical only months earlier. What makes the Chicxulub impact particularly terrifying is how precise the geological evidence has become. Scientists studying drilling cores from the crater have reconstructed the event with second-by-second accuracy. They know the asteroid came in at an angle of approximately 60 degrees from horizontal, which happens to be the worst possible angle for maximum atmospheric damage. They know the impact excavated sulfur-rich rocks that amplified the cooling effect by orders of magnitude. They know that if the asteroid had struck almost anywhere else on Earth, in deeper ocean, or on less sulfur-rich continental crust, the extinction might have been far less severe. The dinosaurs did not simply have bad luck. They had the worst possible luck, at the worst possible angle, in the worst possible location, at the worst possible moment. The most disturbing implication is what the impact reveals about the fragility of dominant species. The dinosaurs were the most successful vertebrates in Earth's history. They had ruled the planet for 160 million years, roughly 800 times longer than modern humans have existed. They had diversified into every conceivable ecological niche, from feathered flying predators to multi-ton plant eaters. They had survived climate shifts, sea level changes, and countless smaller catastrophes over their reign, and none of it mattered. A single rock, roughly the size of a city, fell out of the sky on an otherwise ordinary day, and their entire world ended within hours. Dominance does not guarantee survival. Adaptation does not guarantee survival. Success does not guarantee survival. The only thing that guaranteed the mammals would inherit the Earth was that a particular asteroid happened to intersect a particular orbital path at a particular moment. Everything else was luck. The sky still contains rocks. The orbits still intersect. And somewhere out there, in the dark between worlds, the next Chicxulub is already moving. If you want to see more videos like this, click the video on screen now and make sure to subscribe.